Sometimes, life changes in the smallest of moments. Imagine a powerful CEO, a man who had built his world around rules, discipline, and control. Every detail of his life was polished like glass until one evening, he stepped out of his hotel and heard the quiet, trembling words of an 8-year-old girl. "My mom and dad threw me out." She stood there barefoot, clutching a wrinkled paper bag, her eyes far too old for her young face. In that instant, his perfect order cracked, and a story of heartbreak and hope began to unfold. This is not just a tale about a businessman and a child. It is about what happens when love finds you in the most unexpected places. When compassion refuses to let go. Stay with us, because what follows may change the way you see family forever. Subscribe now to Loss and Healing. Late afternoon settled over Charleston like a painting. The cobblestones glowing beneath a fading sun, the air touched with the salty breath of the harbor. Nathan Caldwell stepped from the boardroom of his towering hotel headquarters with the same precision that had carried him through decades of building an empire. At 44, he was a widower, a man who had mastered the art of control so deeply that even his grief lived inside carefully drawn boundaries. His life was a machine of contracts, flights, numbers balanced to the decimal. He walked through his days like someone moving along rails, never deviating, never faltering. It kept him safe. It kept him untouchable. The valet had already brought around his black Bentley. Its polished surface reflected the golden light, a mirror for a man who carried no trace of disorder. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks, eyes already distant,
I'm lost.
mind shifting toward the solitude of his penthouse, where dinner and a stack of merger proposals waited. That was his life. Predictable, efficient, unbending. But life has a way of breaking into the worlds we build for ourselves. And that evening, just as he reached for the car door, he saw her. At
What's her
first,
name?
it was no more than a flicker of shadow near the service entrance, something his disciplined mind nearly dismissed as irrelevant. Yet the small figure stepped forward, and Nathan paused. A girl, no more than 8, barefoot on the cold pavement. Her sundress was torn at the hem, her hair tangled into wild knots, streaked with dust. Along her thin legs ran scratches that looked raw, as though no one had bothered to tend to them. Pressed tight against her chest was a crumpled paper bag, its edges soft and worn as though it had been carried for days. Her eyes met his, steady in a way that unnerved him. They did not plead, they did not weep. They simply looked at him with a quiet strength that seemed out of place in a child. He nearly turned away. This was not his problem. He could call security. He could tell himself that professionals were better suited to handle whatever story she carried. But then she spoke. Her voice was low, almost flat, carrying no tremor of fear. "I'm lost," she said, "and they don't want me anymore." Nathan's hand froze on the chrome door handle. The words cut deeper than if she had sobbed. They were too calm, too final. He turned back slowly, something inside him twisting. "What's your name?" he asked. "Gracie," she replied after a pause. She held the bag closer, as if it contained the last pieces of her life. "I don't know the rest." Nathan's instincts, honed through years of reading investors and opponents, told him she was telling the truth. No performance, no manipulation, just stark honesty. His heart, long buried beneath schedules and meetings, stirred against his will. He asked about her parents. Her gaze dropped to the pavement. "They're not my parents. That house isn't mine. I remember another place. A yellow house," she explained, her words halting yet certain. "Flowers on the porch. A woman who smelled like cookies." Her description carried such tender detail that Nathan felt the busy noise of the city around them fade into silence. He saw not a child inventing fantasies, but a child clinging to memory like a lifeline. For a moment, he nearly called the police. A friend in the department would know what to do. But then another memory surfaced. A case splashed across headlines. Children trafficked away before help could arrive. The leak had come from within the system itself. Nathan slipped his phone back into his pocket.
Hello?
No, not yet. Not
Are you
until
okay?
he knew who he could trust. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. She was so small, and yet the way she squared her shoulders made her seem older than her years. He asked again where the yellow house was. She shook her head. "I don't know anymore, but I remember it." In that instant, Nathan realized something frighteningly simple. If he walked away, she would vanish back into the shadows. Just another child lost in the cracks of a world too busy to notice. "Come on," he said at last, opening the rear door of his Bentley. "We'll figure this out." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she climbed in, still holding the bag. Still wrapped in that eerie calm, Nathan slid into the driver's seat, unsettled by the choice he had just made. His life had no room for this. And yet, as the car pulled away from the curb, he knew with a certainty that surprised him. This was not a detour. This was the beginning of something that would alter everything he thought was unshakable. The city passed by in slow frames row houses painted in soft pastels, gas lamps flickering to life against the coming dusk. Nathan kept one hand on the wheel, but found his gaze drifting again and again to the small figure in the rearview mirror. She sat with her knees drawn up, toes barely brushing the seat, eyes turned toward the window but unfocused. The bag never left her chest, as though it was the last shield between her and a world that had cast her out. Inside Nathan's mind, a storm gathered. He told himself he should drive her to social services, that he was no guardian, no savior. Yet another voice rose louder than reason. And then what? Would she vanish into a system too crowded to remember her name? Would she be lost forever? The hum of the Bentley's engine filled the silence between them. Nathan's carefully built world, all clean lines and sharp edges, had cracked open in the space of a single evening. And though he did not know why, he already sensed that he would not be able to close it again. The Bentley moved through Charleston's dusky streets, its headlights cutting quiet arcs of gold across brick facades and iron balconies. Inside, the silence between driver and passenger was thick, filled not with comfort, but with the weight of unspoken things. Nathan gripped the wheel, knuckles taut, though his mind was far from the mechanics of driving. Each glance at the rearview mirror showed him the same picture: a small girl curled against the leather seat, bare feet pulled close, her crumpled paper bag clutched like it might disappear if she let it go. Every part of him wanted to find the cleanest way, outdrop her at a shelter, call social services, delegate the problem. But another thought intruded again and again. If he handed her off to a crowded system, what guarantee was there she would not vanish into its cracks? He had read the headlines, stories of children forgotten, shuffled from one file to another until no one remembered their names. His thumb tapped restlessly against the wheel. He needed advice, a steady voice. With a flick of his finger, he pressed the call button on his steering controls. "Call Elaine Porter," he ordered. Within moments, her familiar voice answered, weary but alert. "It's late, Nathan. What's going on?" "I have a child in my car," he said plainly, his voice lower than usual, as though afraid the girl might dissolve into smoke if she overheard. Silence. Then, incredulous, "Is this some kind of metaphor about the board?" "I'm not joking, Elaine. She says her name's Gracie. No last name. I found her outside the hotel. Barefoot. She says her parents don't want her anymore." Elaine's tone shifted instantly, all sharp edges now. "You're taking her to the police, right?" Nathan hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the mirror. Gracie sat too still, her face calm in a way that felt like resignation, not peace. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "She's calm. Too calm. Like she's been through worse." "You're not equipped for this," Elaine pressed. "Neither is the street," he muttered, ending the call before she could argue. The words tasted bitter even to him. He was not equipped for this. He was a CEO, not a guardian, not a rescuer. Yet here she was in his car, quiet as shadow, holding her bag like a secret. Minutes passed before her small voice threaded through the silence. "I don't go to school." Nathan glanced at her in the mirror. "Why not?" "They said I was too dumb, that I'd embarrass them." She kept her eyes on the window, amber light painting her profile. "I stopped talking because they said I talked too much." Nathan's grip tightened on the wheel, the leather creaking beneath his hand. Anger rose in him sharp, protective, unfamiliar. He wanted to tell her she was not dumb, that her words mattered. But the timing felt fragile, as though one wrong sentence could send her further into silence. Then she spoke again, softer. "The lady in the yellow house. I think she cried when I disappeared." The words landed like a stone in still water. Nathan slowed the Bentley, his chest tightening. The image appeared vividly in his mind. A yellow-painted house, flowers on the porch, a woman who smelled like cookies, crying as a little girl vanished from her world. This was not just a child abandoned on the street. This was a story with missing chapters. He kept driving, though not toward his penthouse. Logic told him to hand her over to authorities, but another voice, quieter yet stronger, kept asking, "What happens after you let her go?" The decision settled heavy but certain. He turned the car toward a private clinic his foundation funded. At the very least, they could check her health, give her food, provide safety for the night. When the Bentley finally pulled up to the brick facade, lamps glowing warm against the evening, Nathan cut the engine and stepped out. He came around to her door, holding it open. "Come on," he said gently. She studied his hand for a long moment before sliding out, bag still pressed to her chest. Inside, the receptionist straightened in surprise at seeing the CEO himself with a barefoot child. Nathan lifted a hand. "She needs to be seen right away." His tone left no room for questions. Minutes later, Gracie sat on an exam table, her legs swinging, eyes fixed on the floor. The doctor moved gently, her hands practiced, her voice calm. Nathan stood against the wall, arms folded, every sense sharpened. The examination stretched longer than expected. At last, the doctor's voice lowered, carrying concern. "She's underweight for her age. Multiple bruises in different stages of healing, some old, scrapes untreated, and..." Her glance flicked toward Gracie before softening. Signs of prolonged neglect. Nathan's jaw tightened. His hands slipped into his pockets, fingers curling into fists. When the doctor stepped out to speak with the administrator, Nathan moved closer to the child. He crouched to meet her gaze. "What's in the bag?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "It's mine. I'm not taking it," he said gently. "I just want to know." Her eyes lifted to his, steady and guarded. "It's stuff from before." "Before what?" he wanted to ask. But the door opened before he could. The administrator carried a thin file, her expression uneasy. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly. "We ran her name through every local record schools, medical, child services. There's nothing. No birth certificate, no enrollment. It's like she doesn't exist." Nathan nodded slowly, already pulling out his phone. He called Elaine again, his tone leaving no space for hesitation. "Go deeper. Use federal contacts, but quietly. Run her through every jurisdiction. Keep it off the radar. No one hears about her unless I say so." "Understood," Elaine replied. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, his eyes returning to the child who sat perfectly still, as if none of this surprised her. And in that moment, Nathan knew this was not a case of bad parenting. It was deliberate. Someone had erased her, and for reasons he could not yet explain, he knew he would not walk away. Charleston wore a quiet drizzle like a veil when Nathan's Bentley pulled back to the hotel. The stone drive shone slick beneath the lights, and the night manager was already waiting. Nathan's words were curt and firm. No registrations, no questions, no paper trail. What was usually discretion reserved for celebrities now wrapped itself around a barefoot child hugging a wrinkled bag. Gracie moved carefully from the car, toes brushing wet stone as if she feared the ground itself might betray her. In the elevator, mirrored walls reflected a small figure who didn't fidget, didn't marvel like a child might, but stood still, her bag clutched tight. Nathan's reflection showed a man unsettled, wondering how his world had shifted so quickly. Upstairs, he laid out small comforts, a robe, slippers, hot soup, cocoa with marshmallows. He spoke carefully, each gesture slow, so she would know she had control. She tested the robe, the food, the warmth, always glancing at the door as if escape might be necessary. When he asked about the yellow house again, something softened. She described chipped blue chairs, pots of flowers, wind chimes that sounded like rain. Her lips even hinted at a smile before flattening again into caution. From the bag, she drew tiny treasures. A button shaped like a daisy, a bent hair clip, a stub of crayon, and a crumpled receipt with the word vanilla circled. She lined them up like fragile evidence of another life. With the crayon, she sketched a shaky drawing of a house, a triangle roof, 2 chairs, flower pots. Her hand faltered when she reached the end. Nathan whispered, "That's where you were happy." She nodded once. Then came the moment that broke the air wide open. Her voice thinned to a thread. "A man came late one night. He had a flashlight. He said if I made a sound, he'd bury her in the garden." She curled the receipt in her fist until it squeaked. Nathan kept his tone steady, though his chest burned. "No one is burying anyone. Not now. Not ever." She looked at him, hesitant, then admitted she might know his name but wasn't ready to say. He told her she didn't have tone it until she wanted to. That night, she curled beneath a blanket on the sofa, the paper bag hidden beneath her pillow. Nathan settled into a chair across the room, promising quietly, "If you wake up and need me, just say my name." For the first time, she asked it, "What is your name?" Nathan. She tested it softly, like she was weighing the shape of trust. When her breathing steadied into sleep, he sat awake, watching the rain blur across the harbor. Her small hand, before dreams claimed her, had slipped out to touch the seam of the sofa, as though needing proof that someone was close. Her whispered question came in the half-dream state, fragile as glass. "Do you think she'll smile again?" Nathan knew who she meant, the woman with cookies and wind chimes. He could have offered comfort. Instead, he gave her the truth. If she knew you were safe, she would. The words hung in the room, weighty as a vow. Morning arrived muted, with thin haze over the water. Gracie sat cross-legged, her bag still at her side. The quiet between them was different now, not brittle, but careful, like a door cracked open. A knock sounded. Elaine Porter entered, brisk but gentle, carrying sketch pads, markers, pastels. She greeted Gracie softly, sat on the floor, and began drawing clumsy trees and crooked suns. Gracie watched in silence, then slid off the sofa to join her, adding careful lines that transformed scribbles into something real. It was almost peaceful until Gracie froze, marker hovering midair. Slowly, she set it down, picked up a pen, and wrote one word in deliberate letters. Caleb. She pushed the pad toward Elaine without speaking. The name landed like a blow. Nathan saw her fingers tremble. Elaine met the moment with quiet respect. I am her father now. "Thank you for telling me." She didn't press further. She tucked the page away like evidence and shifted the conversation back to colors and shapes. Later, while Gracie wandered into the bedroom, Elaine and Nathan bent over her laptop. The search results were chilling. Caleb Rowe, former maintenance staff at one of Caldwell's hotels, dismissed years ago for misconduct. No charges filed, but enough to leave unease. A property record surfaced 5 acres inland, a cabin purchased in cash. Nathan's chest went cold. It was no coincidence. 2 days later, the Bentley turned down a neighborhood street where time had left its fingerprint. Houses sagged under years, others painted bright with stubborn care. Elaine read from her tablet, "This is the block." Nathan slowed, scanning porches, yards until he saw it. The yellow house. Faded paint, flower pots empty but still there. 2 weary blue chairs, a brass wind chime swaying faintly. From the back seat, Gracie sat forward sharply. "Stop!" He pulled to the curb. An elderly neighbor appeared with a garden trowel, eyeing them warily until Nathan asked about Miss Maggie. At the mention of her name, the woman's face softened. She spoke of Maggie's kindness, the flowers, the little girl she called Pumpkin. She told of how Maggie searched endlessly when the child disappeared, flyers, questions to strangers, days of walking herself weary. And then of how Maggie suffered a stroke and passed away, her heart broken.
So how are you feeling
Nathan
today?
felt the words like a punch. Behind him, the air shifted. Gracie had slipped from the car, drawn by memory. She faced the house, fists clenched. Her voice cracked through the street. "She didn't give me away." The words shook. "Someone sold me. She cried for me. I know she did." But they lied. Her fury was small but fierce, too large for her frame. Nathan crouched, so his voice met her where she stood. "No one here believes that lie anymore." Her breathing slowed, her gaze fixed on the porch as if trying to bend time backward. Finally, she whispered, "I remember her voice." Nathan rested a steadying hand on her shoulder. The promise in his voice was quiet but firm. "We're going to find the truth, every piece of it." The wind caught the brass chime above the porch. Its sound thin but unyielding, following them back to the car like a vow carried on air. The decision to confront the name Gracie had written Calebos not taken lightly. For days, Nathan carried it like a stone in his chest, heavy and immovable. Elaine's research had given them more than a name. It had unearthed a trail, a dismissal from one of Caldwell's hotels, a vague misconduct report, and finally a deed to a cabin deep in the low-country woods, purchased in cash, remote, hidden. Nathan sat in his study one evening, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across contracts he had ignored. His world of mergers and numbers seemed trivial now. pale beside the truth of a child who had whispered about fear in the dark.
Look how many
For the
lights
first
are
time
on
in
now.
years, his instincts were not about profit or control, they were about protection. When he called Elaine, her voice was low but steady. It's him. The records match. That cabin is his. Nathan leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. Then we don't wait, we go. Elaine reminded him of the risks. Rural land, possible accomplices. No one knew what they might find.
Is this
But
really
Nathan's
mine?
resolve had hardened into something unshakable. I am not letting this man disappear into the shadows.
It is yours.
Not
with
again.
certainty.
They brought in Sheriff Daniels, a man Elaine trusted from her years in law. Together, they built a plan. Warrants, a grid of the property,
morning.
medics
Good
on
morning.
standby. Nathan's private security would work alongside county deputies. Every piece had to fit, every precaution accounted for.
And
It was
just
not
makes
just
me
about
so
catching a
happy and
criminal.
so excited.
It was about ensuring no one slipped away. No evidence was
Thank you
lost.
so much for this
No
opportunity.
child
I really
remained
appreciate it.
unaccounted for. On the morning they left Charleston, dawn had barely touched the sky. 3 vehicles rolled out quietly, engines low against the whisper of marsh grass. Nathan rode in the lead SUV with Elaine and Daniels, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the road. The weight of responsibility pressed on him heavier than any corporate deal he had ever signed. The forest closed in around them as they neared the property. Pines leaned over the narrow road, their needles dripping with last night's mist. The air smelled of iron and wet leaves. Daniels raised a hand, signaling for silence. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The cabin appeared suddenly, as though it had been waiting. A sagging porch, a tin roof rusted through, windows blind with grime. Beyond it lay a lake, still and gray beneath a skin of fog. 2 on the porch, 2 at the back. Daniels instructed into his mic. The team moved like water, silent, efficient. The porch steps groaned under armored boots, and with a sharp count, the door gave way in a splinter of wood. Nathan stayed behind the engine block, his chest tight, listening. For a moment there was only silence, then the rapid cadence of boots, shouts of
She had no
"Clear
idea
left!
what to
Hands
do."
down!" The
And
sound
when
of
moving
struggle,
forward,
then
the
metal
steps.
clinking into place. Moments later, deputies emerged with a man in cuffs. His wrists were bound, his jaw set in an ugly defiance that looked like habit more than strength. His eyes swept the scene, landing on Nathan as though daring him to blink first. Nathan did not respond. He only watched as Caleb Rowe was pushed into the back of a cruiser, the door shutting with a final echoing thud. Inside the cabin, the air was colder. Damp wood, old ash, and something sour lingered. Dust drifted in weak rays of light that filtered through the filth-caked windows. The place felt abandoned yet lived in, as if it had been used for purposes that avoided daylight. On a scarred table lay a metal box. Daniels pried it open carefully, and photographs slid across the surface. Nathan
Please
picked
make
one
it
up with
stop.
gloved hands, his breath tightening. Gracie stared back at him from the images mauler, hair uneven, eyes looking anywhere but the camera. Another photo showed a porch Nathan now recognized. The yellow house. Other faces appeared too. Children he did not know. Each caught mid-fear. "Bag all of it," Nathan said, his voice flat but resolute. They moved through the cabin room by room. A narrow cot with a blanket thin as paper. Bolts in the wall at ankle height. A refrigerator padlocked shut, holding only cans and a single rotting apple. A ledger filled with initials, dates, crude maps, and dollar signs.
Giggle
Evidence of a
softly.
trade, brutal and
Chuckles
cold.
gently.
Near the kitchen, deputies pried open a trap door. Stale air rose up, carrying the stench of metal and damp earth. The crawl space beneath bore scratches, small shoe marks etched into the dirt. Scattered objects lay there: a butterfly-shaped barrette, a sock with stars, bottle caps arranged in a lonely line of play. Nathan's throat closed. These were traces of lives stolen, fragments of children's worlds reduced to debris in the dark. "Get CSI in here," Daniel said tightly. "Floor to rafters." By the time they stepped back outside, the mist over the lake
Are
had
you ready
thinned
for
into
permanent
sunlight.
custody of the child?
Nathan walked to the water's edge, staring across the still surface. His voice, when it came, was low but unwavering. "He won't get near her again." The forest accepted the words like an oath. What followed unfolded like controlled chaos. Evidence was gathered, cataloged, sealed. Forensics worked room by room. Deputies pieced together old complaints, cases long ignored. Elaine stitched threads into a narrative that a judge could not overlook. Nathan used his resources to ensure nothing was lost, no page misplaced. And all the while, he thought of the girl in his penthouse suite, clutching her bag, asking only once, "Is he gone?" When the answer finally came, Nathan knew it would not be enough to simply say yes. He would show her. Every action, every promise from here on out would prove that the nightmare was over and that she was no longer alone. The raid on the cabin was only the beginning. For Nathan, the days that followed felt like balancing on the edge of a storm. Evidence poured in from every direction: autographs, ledgers, testimonies pulled from forgotten files. Forensic teams boxed the cabin piece by piece, while deputies unearthed connections in county records that had been overlooked for years. Elaine sat hunched over her laptop in the hotel suite that had become their war room, eyes red from exhaustion but bright with determination. Nathan moved through it all with steady purpose, but at night he returned to the suite where Gracie waited. She slept on the sofa under a soft blanket, her bag never far, asking only once in a quiet voice that pierced him, "Is he gone?" Each time, he gave the same answer, not with words but with presence. He stayed where she could see him, so that every time her eyes searched for reassurance, he was there. 2 days later, the call came. Elaine entered the room carrying a file so thin, yet so powerful, it seemed to weigh down her hands. "The DNA results are in," she said. Her bun had collapsed into loose strands, her face worn with fatigue. "She's not biologically related to the couple who claimed her. Birth certificate confirms her name, Grace Margaret Hanlon." Nathan sat back, letting the truth settle like a stone into his chest. A name, an identity, proof she had existed before fear tried to erase her. Elaine placed a faded photograph on the table. A woman with short gray hair, laugh lines around her eyes, a scar along her collar. The neighbor had called her Miss Maggie. "Margaret Ann Holloway," Elaine explained. "Deceased. She took in Gracie when she was a toddler, raised her for 2 years. Then the child disappeared. Maggie searched for her endlessly until a stroke ended her life."
Not scared anymore.
Nathan studied the photo, the scar, the lines, the warmth in the woman's eyes. For Gracie, it was a beginning built on love, not abandonment. That evening, Elaine filed an emergency petition for guardianship. The hearing was set for the next morning in a small courtroom where the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and history. Nathan entered holding Gracie's hand. She wore a soft yellow cardigan Elaine had found. Its sleeves rolled at her narrow wrists. Her grip was firm, her eyes serious as she studied the judge's nameplate. She looked not like a child waiting for charity, but like someone preparing to claim her place. The judge reviewed the affidavits, the raid on the cabin, the DNA results, Maggie's death certificate, letters from Nathan's foundation, statements from counselors who worked with hotel staff families. At last, he lifted his eyes. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, voice steady and human, "are you prepared for this to be permanent? To assume guardianship with the rights and responsibilities of a parent?" Nathan did not answer right away. He turned to Gracie, and in her eyes, he saw every step they had walked together: the service entrance, the cocoa steam, the yellow house, the brass wind chime. He faced the bench again. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I am her father now." The gavel came down, small but absolute. In the hallway outside, Elaine explained the details. Emergency guardianship would last 60 days, during which Child Protective Services would run background checks and make visits. If all cleared, full custody would follow. Nathan only nodded. Either way, she is not going back. Outside, Charleston gleamed after a morning rain. Reporters crowded, flashbulbs igniting, but Nathan raised a hand. "No statements," he told the wall of questions, guiding Gracie past them. She tugged at his sleeve. "What does it mean?" "It means home doesn't have to ask permission to be home," he said gently. "It means I sign the forms, but you decide when your room needs more yellow." Her gaze lifted toward the harbor, a small hope flickering. "Do you think everything will stay like this?" He crouched so their eyes met, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of his knuckle. "It won't always be easy," he told her, steady as tide. "But I'll be here, always." Her shoulders eased, a quiet breath leaving her. She didn't smile yet, but something heavy slipped from her. Together they stepped into the day, uncertain but theirs. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of their life began to change. Nathan had the guest room painted a soft yellow sunlight spilling across new curtains each morning. Flower pots lined the sill, blooms catching the breeze, their fragrance drifting like a reminder of Maggie's love. Gracie tested each detail as if she didn't quite believe it could belong to her. She ran her hand across the quilt, touched the flowers, then turned to him one morning and asked softly, "Is this mine?" "It's yours," he said with certainty. Every inch of it. Their mornings found shape in small rituals. Cocoa for her, coffee for him, her legs swinging from the stool while she spoke about dreams or books she wanted to read. He listened with the patience of a man, learning the language of trust. Evenings were gentler still reading together, or her sketching while he typed on his laptop, the scratch of crayons blending with the quiet tapping of keys.
Court is now in session.
Her drawings began to change. At first, they were lined in gray and brown, sparse and hesitant. Slowly, color returned. Sunflower yellows, sky blues. People appeared again, 2 figures, sometimes 3, always with smiling faces. When the anniversary of Maggie's passing came, Nathan suggested they honor her. Together they carried flower seedlings to the porch, digging small holes in warm spring soil. Gracie's hands moved with care, almost reverence, as she tucked each bloom into place. She sat back on her heels, dirt smudged on her jeans, and whispered, "Now she knows I'm safe." Then she looked at Nathan, her eyes steady, her voice stronger. "I'm not scared anymore." Nathan crouched beside her, brushing hair from her cheek with a tenderness that needed no explanation. She gave him a small, almost shy smile. "I'm glad you stayed." His chest tightened with something that felt like both loss and healing.
Know how to make me laugh.
"I'm glad you found me," he replied. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the fresh blooms. And for the first time in years, Nathan felt that life was not about contracts or deadlines, but about promises kept promises to a child who had finally been returned not just to safety but to love. Morning in Charleston carried a softness that seemed almost new to Nathan. Sunlight streamed through gauzy curtains into a room painted the color of pale buttercream, warming the yellow walls he had chosen just for her. Gracie stirred beneath the quilt, her paper bag tucked beside her pillow, as though even in safety she still needed the proof of her past close at hand. Nathan stood in the doorway with a mug of coffee cooling between his palms, watching as she slowly sat up. Her small fingers trailed along the edge of the quilt, then touched the row of flower pots on the sill, their blooms catching the breeze. When she finally looked at him, her voice was quiet, half wonder, half disbelief. "Is this really mine?" "It's yours," he said simply. And in those words lay something larger than property, something binding, a declaration that she would never again be cast aside. Over the following weeks, life in his home grew into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Mornings began in the kitchen, her legs swinging from the high stool as steam curled from a mug of cocoa. Nathan sat across with his newspaper, though his attention often strayed to her chatter about dreams, the magnolia tree outside, or the stories she was sketching. She spoke more now, her words no longer tentative but spilling with a child's curiosity, as though she had discovered her voice anew. Evenings brought a softer kind of quiet. Sometimes Nathan read aloud, his voice steady and deep, filling the den with the cadence of stories. Other times she sketched while he worked at his laptop, the sound of crayon strokes mixing with the click of keys. Slowly, the drawings shifted. Gone were the shadowed lines and muted tones. Colors bloomed bright yellows, deep blues, green fields. She drew people again too. Always 2, sometimes 3. And in every picture their faces were smiling.
This is my favorite part
Nathan kept these sketches like treasures, slipping them into folders or tucking them into drawers. Each one felt like a milestone, proof that her world was opening again. When the anniversary of Maggie's death approached, Nathan suggested they honor her memory. Together, they carried a tray of seedlings to the porch. The spring air was warm, bees humming lazily among nearby blossoms. Gracie knelt in the soil, her hands careful and deliberate as she planted each flower. She brushed dirt from her palms, then sat back on her heels, gazing at the blooms. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "Now she knows I'm safe." She lifted her eyes to him then, and there was strength in them, strength stitched together from all the broken places. "I'm not scared anymore." Nathan crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She smiled, small, tentative, but real. "I'm glad you stayed," she whispered. "And I'm glad you found me," he answered.
Sense.
It was a moment stitched into the golden light of that evening, a promise sealed not by contracts or courts, but by love freely given. Still, not every day was easy. Some nights, shadows returned in her dreams. Nathan would wake to hear her breathing quicken, her hands clutching the pillow where her paper bag hid. Each time he crossed the room, sat beside her, and reminded her with his presence that she was no longer alone. Slowly, those nights grew fewer, replaced with mornings where she greeted him with the simple question, "What's for breakfast?" The court dates came and went. Social workers visited, observing the rhythm of their new life, noting the warmth of her room, the laughter beginning to slip between them. Nathan met each question calmly, each form with steady resolve. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals with less intensity, but none of those had carried stakes like this. Finally, the day arrived when the hearing moved beyond temporary guardianship. The courtroom was small, sunlight pooling across polished wood.
Look at
Gracie
that.
sat beside him, her cardigan sleeves rolled back, her hand wrapped firmly around his. The judge asked the question with quiet gravity. "Mr. Caldwell, are you ready to assume permanent custody with all rights and responsibilities of a parent?" Nathan turned to Gracie, searching her eyes. He saw the long road behind them, the rain-streaked night when she first stood in shadows, the cocoa steam curling between them, the porch with its brass wind chime, the drawings filled with color. When he faced the bench again, his voice carried no hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I am her father." The gavel struck, a sound small in the room but monumental in its weight. Outside the courthouse, flashbulbs flared. Nathan shielded her from the barrage with his arm. "No statements," he said firmly, guiding her forward. Reporters shouted questions, but Gracie ignored them, her eyes fixed on him. "What does it mean?" she asked again. "It means home doesn't have to ask permission to be home," he told her. "It means from now on, you get to decide what your world looks like. More yellow on your walls, more flowers on the porch, whatever you want." She thought about this, her gaze drifting to the slice of harbor visible between buildings. "Do you think everything will stay like this?" He crouched to meet her eyes, brushing her cheek lightly with the back of his knuckle. "It won't always be easy," he said. "But I'll be here, always." Her shoulders released a breath she had been holding for far too long. She nodded, not smiling yet, but lighter, as though some unseen burden had finally been set down. In the days that followed, their home filled with color and warmth. Gracie's laughter, tentative at first, began to thread through the rooms. She drew new pictures for the refrigerator, always with bright skies. She planted more flowers, watering them with diligence. And each night, when Nathan tucked her into bed, she whispered the same words before closing her eyes. "Good night, Dad." It was a title Nathan had never expected to wear. Yet each time she spoke it, he felt its truth settle deeper, binding him not by law alone, but by choice, by love. For Nathan and Gracie, the story was no longer about loss. It was about what they were building together, something fragile yet resilient. A life no longer defined by shadows, but by healing. Life often surprises us in the moments we least expect, unraveling the plans we thought were unshakable and replacing them with something we never imagined possible. For Nathan, it began with a child standing barefoot in the shadows, clutching a paper bag like it held the last threads of her existence. He could have walked away. He could have told himself that it was not his problem. But in choosing to stay, he altered not only her future, but his own. Gracie's journey was not just about survival. It was about finding her voice again, about discovering that home is not defined by blood or legality alone, but by love that chooses to remain. With every sketch she made, every flower planted in memory of Maggie, every quiet night when fear loosened its hold, she rebuilt herself piece by piece. And standing beside her, Nathan learned that the greatest wealth is not measured in contracts or profits, but in the courage to love when it is most difficult. Their story reminds us that healing is not a single act, but a series of promises kept, small choices, steady presence, words spoken at the right time. It reminds us that family can be written not only by birth, but by the decisions of the heart. For every child like Gracie who wonders if they are worth staying for, there is the possibility of someone who will answer, "Yes, I will stay. Yes, you are safe. Yes, you are loved." And for every adult like Nathan who believes life has been carved into rigid lines, there is the truth that compassion has the power to redraw them. We may not all face the same choices he did, but we each have moments where we can decide to step forward, to listen, to protect, to love. If this story has touched you, let it remind you that no act of love is too small to change a life. A word, a gesture, a promise can open doors to healing where there was once only despair. Gracie's smile, tentative but real, is proof that even after the darkest storms, light can return. At Loss and Healing, we believe in sharing these stories not just to inspire, but to remind each of us of our capacity for kindness. If you felt moved by Nathan and Gracie's journey, we invite you to become part of this community. Subscribe, share, and stay with us as we continue to explore stories of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of love to heal what has been broken. Because sometimes, the smallest choice to care can become the greatest story of all.